The scent of warm croissants and raspberry jam still lingered on her fingertips, a sweet memory from the celebratory breakfast she'd made. At 7 months pregnant, Gloriana Montclair felt a profound sense of contentment, a gentle hum of joy that resonated with the tiny life fluttering inside her. She was on her way to surprise her husband Caspian with his favorite lunch, a small, spontaneous act of love. As the elevator ascended, the gleaming glass spine of the Montclair Innovations Tower, she smoothed down her silk maternity dress, her reflection a picture of serene happiness. But what she was about to find behind the polished oak doors of his penthouse office would not just shatter her afternoon. It would detonate the entire beautiful architecture of her life. Gloriana Montclair believed in structure. As an architect, she understood that the most beautiful creations were built on the strongest foundations. Her life with Caspian was her masterpiece. They had met at a university gala, she a promising graduate student with sketches of impossible buildings, and he a young tech magnate who had just taken his father's company, Montclair Innovations, into the stratosphere. He hadn't been drawn to her beauty alone, but to the sharp, organized mind behind her eyes. He'd said she designed her arguments as meticulously as she designed her blueprints. Their home, a sprawling, modernist marvel cantilevered over a cliff in upstate New York, was her design. Every line, every pane of glass, every piece of furniture was a testament to their shared vision and love. It was a life of quiet elegance, punctuated by the dazzling demands of Caspian's World Charity Balls, in Gloria Niva Tech summits in Tokyo, and weekend getaways to their private island in the Grenadines. Through it all, their foundation seemed unshakable. Now, with their first child on the way, a boy, the final, most important piece of their life's design, was falling into place. That Tuesday began with sunshine streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows of their penthouse on Park Avenue, their weekday residence. Caspian had been up since dawn, his energy a constant thrumming force. He'd kissed her belly, then her lips, murmuring about a massive merger deal, Project Nightingale, that was consuming him. "It's the final push, Gloriana," he'd said, his grey eyes alight with ambition. "After this, I'm all yours. I promise." She believed him. She always did. By noon, a wave of affection washed over her. Caspian often forgot to eat when he was this focused. The idea to surprise him was impulsive and pure. She had their driver, Paul, take her to Le Bernardin, one of Caspian's favorites, and picked up a meticulously packed lunch of pan-roasted lobster and truffle vinaigrette salad. The doorman at the Montclair building greeted her with a familiar, warm smile. "Mrs. Montclair, a lovely surprise. The big man will be happy to see you." The private elevator whisked her directly to the 80th floor, the executive level. The air here was different, hushed, cool, and smelling faintly of expensive leather and ozone from the servers. Caspian's longtime executive assistant, a stern but loyal woman in her late 50s named Brenda, was not at her desk. This was unusual. Brenda was a fixture, a gatekeeper, as formidable as the building's security. A faint, unfamiliar floral scent, something sharp and cloying like tuberose, hung in the air. Gloriana's hand rested on the large, custom-carved oak door to Caspian's office. Her heart gave a little flutter of excitement. She imagined his face, the stress melting away into a surprised smile when he saw her. She turned the heavy brass handle, pushing the door inward without knocking. "Caspian, darling, I hope I'm not interrupting anything too critical." The words died in her throat. The scene before her was quiet, professional, yet utterly devastating. The vast office with its panoramic view of Central Park was bathed in midday light. Caspian was at his massive mahogany desk, his back to her, deep in conversation on the phone. But it wasn't Caspian that made the air crystallize in her lungs. It was the woman. She was sitting in the chair. Her chair. It wasn't just any chair. It was a custom-made Eames lounge chair and ottoman that Gloriana had commissioned for Caspian's 35th birthday. The leather was a specific shade of oxblood, a color he loved, and she had overseen the craftsman in his workshop in Pennsylvania. It was their inside joke, his throne. She was the only other person who ever sat in it, curling up with a book while he worked late. Now a woman occupied it. She was the epitome of corporate chic, a razor-sharp black dress stilettos that could double as weapons, and a severe dark bob that framed a face of cool, angular beauty. Her legs were crossed, one heel tapping a silent, impatient rhythm on the priceless Persian rug. She held a tablet, but her eyes, cold and assessing, were fixed on Caspian. She wasn't just sitting in the chair. She was inhabiting it, owning the space, with an unnerving proprietary air. This was Naomi Pierce, Caspian's VP of Strategic Acquisitions. Gloriana had met her a few times at company events. She was brilliant, ruthless, and Gloriana had always thought entirely devoid of warmth. Caspian had praised her work ethic, calling her his secret weapon for the Nightingale deal. The tableau was almost a painting of corporate power, but Gloriana's architectural eye saw the hidden lines, the subtle geometry of intimacy. The woman's proximity to Caspian, the way her briefcase sat beside the chair as if it lived there, the half-empty glass of water on the side table, identical to the one on Caspian's desk. Caspian, still on the phone, finally sensed her presence. He swiveled around. The professional focus on his face instantly dissolved, replaced by a flicker of something she'd never seen there before. Pure, unadulterated panic. His eyes darted from Gloriana's face to the lunch bag in her hand, to Naomi Pierce, who was now looking at Gloriana with an expression of mild, dismissive curiosity. "Gloriana," Caspian stammered into the phone, "I have to call you back." He hung up abruptly, the click echoing in the sudden, suffocating silence. He stood up, his 6'2" frame, suddenly seeming clumsy, ill-fitting in his own office. "Honey, what a surprise." Gloriana's gaze didn't move from the woman in her chair. The world had narrowed to that single obscene detail. The croissants she had eaten for breakfast turned to acid in her stomach. The baby inside her gave a sharp, sudden kick, as if reacting to the poison flooding its mother's veins. Naomi Pierce slowly, deliberately uncrossed her legs. She didn't stand. She didn't excuse herself. She simply watched a faint, knowing smirk playing on her lips. It was a look that said, "This is my space now, and you are the interruption." The silence in the office was a living thing, thick and suffocating. It pressed in on Gloriana, making it hard to breathe. Every detail was suddenly in hyperfocus, the faint shimmer of dust motes in the sunbeams, the precise geometric pattern of the rug, the cold, indifferent skyline of New York City, visible through the vast window. Caspian's face was a mask of forced casualness, a poor performance from a man who was usually so masterful. "Gloriana, this is Naomi Pierce. I believe you've met," he said, his voice a little too loud, a little too hearty. "We were just in the middle of a marathon session on the Nightingale merger. Naomi's been practically living here." Naomi offered a slow, deliberate nod. Her eyes, the color of slate, raked over Gloriana, lingering for a fraction of a second on her swollen belly before meeting her gaze. There was no apology in them, no deference. There was only challenge. "Mrs. Montclair," she said, her voice smooth and low, like polished river stones. "A pleasure." The words were correct, but the tone was laced with an insolence that was as sharp as a slap. Gloriana's hand, still clutching the handle of the insulated lunch bag, felt clammy. The world-class cuisine inside suddenly seemed pathetic, a naive offering from a clueless wife. She kept her eyes locked on Naomi. The question was a shard of ice in her throat. "Get out of my chair," she said. Her voice was quiet, almost a whisper, but it cut through the tension like a scalpel. Caspian's forced smile faltered. He took a step toward her hands, slightly raised in a placating gesture. "Gloriana, honey, let's not be. I wasn't speaking to you." Gloriana interrupted her gaze, still fixed on Naomi. The baby kicked again, a frantic, insistent rhythm against her ribs. She placed a hand over the spot, a protective, instinctual gesture. Naomi's smirk deepened. She made a show of looking down at the oxblood leather, running a perfectly manicured finger along the armrest. "Is this your chair? I had no idea the furniture in the CEO's office came with designated seating. My mistake." She began to gather her things, but with an infuriating slowness, a clear act of defiance. "Naomi," Caspian said, his voice now tight with warning. With a sigh of performative exasperation, Naomi finally stood. She was taller than Gloriana had realized, lithe and formidable. As she moved past Gloriana to retrieve her blazer from the coat stand, that cloying tuberose scent washed over her again. It was the same scent that had been lingering in their bedroom for the past few weeks, a scent Caspian had dismissed as coming from a new air freshener the cleaning staff was using. The realization hit Gloriana with the force of a physical blow. It wasn't just a suspicion anymore. It wasn't a misunderstanding. This was real. The chair was just a symbol of a much deeper, more profane trespass. Once Naomi had her blazer, she paused at the door. "Caspian, we need to finalize the presentation for the board by 5. I'll be in my office." She didn't look at Gloriana again. She simply walked out, pulling the heavy oak door closed behind her, leaving a vortex of silence in her wake. Gloriana and Caspian were alone. He looked wrecked. His usually impeccable grey suit seemed rumpled, his tie slightly askew. He ran a hand through his sandy blonde hair, a nervous tick she hadn't seen since their first date. "Gloriana, I am so sorry," he began, his voice dropping to a desperate hush. "You shouldn't have seen that. It's not what it looks like." Gloriana finally let herself look at him. She studied his face, the face she woke up to every morning, the face she loved, with a fierceness that now felt like a liability. She saw the lie in his eyes before he even finished the sentence. "Not what it looks like," she repeated, her voice dangerously calm. "She was in my chair, Caspian. She smells like our bedroom. What exactly am I getting wrong? It's complicated. The merger. It's been intense. We've been working night and day. Lines got blurred." "Blurred?" The word was incredulous. "You're the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar corporation. You don't blur lines, Caspian. You make decisions. You drew a line right through our marriage and let her step over it." She placed the lunch bag on the corner of his desk with a soft, final thud. "You forgot to eat," she said, the mundane words sounding absurd in the charged atmosphere. Tears were now streaming down his face. He was a man who never cried. The sight of it was shocking, but it didn't move her. It felt like another tactic, another performance. "Gloriana, please," he pleaded, reaching for her. "I love you. You and this baby are my life. This with Naomi. It was a mistake. A stupid, meaningless mistake. It's over. I'll end it right now." She flinched away from his touch, as if he were on fire. "A mistake is spilling coffee, Caspian. A mistake is forgetting to pick up dry cleaning. This is a betrayal. You let her into our life, into your office. Into my chair." Her voice broke on the last words. The symbolism of it was a unique kind of torture. It was a seat she had gifted him, out of love, a place of comfort and partnership. He had allowed it to be defiled. "What do I do?" Tell me what to do to fix this." He begged, his composure completely gone. Gloriana looked around the magnificent office, a space that had always felt like a shared symbol of their success. Now it felt alien, a crime scene. She looked at the man she had promised to spend her life with, and for the first time she saw a stranger. A weak, deceitful stranger. She didn't have a plan. She had no strategy. All she had was the raw, primal instinct of a woman, a mother whose entire foundation had just been dynamited. "Don't call me," she said, her voice flat and hollow. "Don't come home." She turned and walked out of the office, her back straight, her head held high. She didn't look back. She walked past Brenda's empty desk, through the silent reception area, and into the elevator. The doors slid shut, encasing her in a mirrored box. It was only then, watching her own reflection, the pale, shocked face, the hand protectively covering her child, that the first sob escaped, a ragged, wounded sound that was the beginning of her world coming apart. The ride down in the elevator was a silent freefall. The city blurred past the glass walls, a dizzying, indifferent panorama. Back in the car, Paul, their driver for over a decade, saw her face in the rearview mirror, and his professional mask flickered. "Everything all right, Mrs. Montclair?" Gloriana couldn't form words. She just gave a single tight shake of her head. He understood. The rest of the drive back to the Park Avenue penthouse was made in a heavy, respectful silence. The moment she stepped inside the apartment, the carefully constructed dam of her composure burst. The sobs came in great, heaving waves that racked her body. She collapsed onto a sofa in the living room, a piece she had custom designed in soft dove-grey velvet. The apartment, once her sanctuary, now felt like a stage set for a life that was no longer real. Every object was a memory, a testament to a shared intimacy that was now a lie. The photograph on the mantelpiece of them in Santorini, laughing into the sunset. The volume of poetry on the coffee table he'd bought her. The very air, recycled and temperature-controlled, felt tainted with his scent. His presence. His betrayal. Her phone began to buzz incessantly. Caspian. Then Caspian Mobile. Then a text message. "Gloriana, please talk to me. We can fix this. Another. I'm nothing without you." She stared at the screen, a cold, hard anger beginning to crystallize over the raw wound of her grief. Fix this. He spoke of their marriage like a broken piece of code, something to be debugged and rebooted. He had no idea of the structural damage he had caused. He hadn't just cracked the foundation, he had detonated it. With a trembling finger, she blocked his number. Then she blocked his work number. She went through her contacts and blocked every member of his family. She needed silence. She needed to think. Her architect's mind, usually a calm space of lines, angles, and solutions, was a maelstrom of chaos. But slowly, through the storm, instinct took over. A structure needed to be assessed before it could be rebuilt, or in this case, demolished. Her first call was not to a friend or her mother. It was to Robert Gable of the law firm Whitman, Price and Gable. He had been her father's lawyer and had handled the prenuptial agreement she and Caspian had signed. At the time, she'd thought of it as a morbid formality. Caspian had insisted it be generous, a sign of his love and respect. Now it was her only weapon. "Robert," she said, her voice hoarse from crying. "It's Gloriana Montclair. I need to see you, as soon as possible." There was no surprise in the old lawyer's voice. In his line of work, he had heard every variation of this call. "Of course, Gloriana. Is my office at 2 this afternoon acceptable?" Her second call was harder. She needed an ally, someone on the inside. Her mind immediately went to Brenda Caspian's assistant. Brenda had been with Montclair Innovations since Caspian's father was in charge. She was impeccably professional, but Gloriana had always sensed a deep, quiet well of integrity behind her stern demeanor. On the few occasions when Caspian had been thoughtless or arrogant, Gloriana had seen a flicker of disapproval in Brenda's eyes. Brenda was loyal to the company, to the Montclair name, but perhaps not to Caspian's transgressions. It was a huge risk. If Brenda alerted Caspian, it would be disastrous, but Gloriana's intuition told her it was a risk worth taking. She called the main switchboard and asked for Brenda's direct line. "Brenda Mayhew speaking." "Brenda, it's Gloriana Montclair." There was a pause. "Mrs. Montclair, I saw you leave." The unspoken words hung in the air. "I know what happened. I'm sorry." "Brenda," Gloriana said, choosing her words carefully. "I know this is an unorthodox and unprofessional request, and I will understand completely if you refuse. But I am in a difficult position. I need information." Another pause, longer this time. Gloriana could hear the faint hum of the office in the background. She was asking Brenda to betray her boss to risk the job she'd held for 30 years. What kind of information? Brenda's voice was low, cautious. Expense reports, travel itineraries, anything related to Caspian and Naomi Pierce for the past year, especially anything related to Project Nightingale. Gloriana didn't know why she added the project name. It was just a gut feeling, a sense that this affair and his professional obsession were intertwined. "That's highly confidential, Mrs. Montclair." "I know," Gloriana said softly. "I also know you were fond of my father. He always said you were the true heart of the company. He said you cared about its integrity more than anyone." She heard a soft sigh on the other end of the line. "Your father was a good man," Brenda said, a hint of warmth finally entering her tone. "Things have changed. Let me see what I can do. I can't promise anything. And you did not get it from me. Thank you, Brenda. You won't regret this." After she hung up, Gloriana felt the first tiny spark of empowerment. The grief was still a tidal wave, but now she had a piece of driftwood to cling to. She was not just going to be a victim. She was not going to be the weeping, hysterical wife. She was Gloriana Davenport Montclair. She was the daughter of a brilliant engineer who had co-founded this company, and she was an architect. She knew how to read a blueprint, and if she had to, she knew how to draw up a plan for demolition. She walked into her home office, a sleek minimalist space overlooking the city. On the wall was a framed copy of the original blueprint for their house. She ran her fingers over the clean, precise lines. A home built on love and trust. Now she needed a new blueprint, a blueprint for war. 2 days passed in a haze of forced calm. Gloriana stayed in the penthouse, a gilded prison cell refusing all calls and visitors. She ate for the baby slept when exhaustion overwhelmed her, and spent the rest of her time staring out at the city, her mind a whirlwind of planning and pain. The shock had subsided, replaced by a cold, sharp-edged fury that was more useful than grief. On the third morning, a discreetly marked courier envelope arrived. Inside was a flash drive with no note. It was from Brenda. Gloriana plugged it into her laptop, her heart pounding. It was a data dump of everything she had asked for, and more. Expense reports, corporate credit card statements, flight manifests, hotel bookings, and internal memos, all meticulously organized into folders. Brenda was nothing if not thorough. For the next 10 hours, fueled by chamomile tea and a grim determination, Gloriana immersed herself in the digital trail of her husband's betrayal. It was more sordid and calculated than she could have imagined. The affair hadn't been a recent blurring of lines. It had been going on for at least 18 months. It started during a business trip to Zurich. She saw the evidence in the hotel folio: 2 rooms booked, but room service charges for champagne and a late-night dinner for 2, all billed to Caspian's room. After that, the pattern was clear. Every business trip, Singapore, London, San Francisco, featured the same arrangement. Sometimes they were sloppy a charge for a woman's spa treatment on his bill, a restaurant receipt from a romantic bistro miles away from the convention center. The pain was acute, a fresh stab with every line item. She saw a charge from a high-end lingerie boutique in Paris on a trip she thought he'd taken alone. A hotel booking for a beachfront villa in Maui for a solo strategy retreat. He had been living a complete double life, funding it with the profits of the company her own father had helped build. But as she dug deeper, a new, more sinister pattern began to emerge. The affair wasn't just personal, it was deeply entangled with Project Nightingale. Project Nightingale was a hostile takeover of a rival tech firm, a smaller innovative company called Etheria Dynamics. It was Caspian's passion project, the deal that would cement his legacy. He told her it was his vision, his masterpiece. But the documents told a different story. Gloriana cross-referenced Naomi's travel with the project's timeline. She noticed that Naomi often took separate, unsanctioned trips right before major breakthroughs in the deal. A weekend in the Cayman Islands, where Etheria's primary investor was known to vacation. A flight to a small town in Colorado, the hometown of Etheria's lead engineer. These trips were buried in miscellaneous consulting fees or research expenses, all personally approved by Caspian. Brenda had also included a folder labeled Nightingale Drafts. It contained early versions of the proposal. The initial concept, dated 2 years prior, was recognizably Caspian's bold, aggressive, but with a certain creative flair. But as time went on and Naomi's influence grew, the tone of the documents changed. They became more ruthless, more clinical. Key strategies were altered, and most damningly, Gloriana found a memo authored by Naomi outlining a plan to deliberately undervalue Etheria by planting negative press and leveraging a key board member's personal debt, a strategy that bordered on illegal market manipulation. Caspian had signed off on it. This wasn't just an affair. This was a conspiracy. Naomi wasn't just his mistress. She was his co-conspirator, pushing him down a path of ethical and potentially legal ruin. She was a parasite feeding off his ambition, twisting his vision into something ugly and corrupt. The chair in his office wasn't just a place she sat. It was a symbol of the power she now wielded over him, and by extension, his entire company. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place when Gloriana opened a password-protected file Brenda had simply named "For Your Eyes Only." The password was Davenport, her maiden name. Inside was a single document, the original partnership agreement for Montclair Innovations, signed 40 years ago by Caspian's father, George Montclair, and her own father, Peter Davenport. Gloriana had always known her father was an early partner. He had been the engineering genius behind their foundational patents. But after his death when she was in college, she had been told he had sold most of his shares back to the Montclair family, leaving her with a comfortable but non-controlling trust fund. The document in front of her revealed that to be a carefully constructed lie. Her father had never sold his shares. He had structured them into a trust for her, a trust that was to remain dormant and under the management of a third-party executor until she either turned 40 or in the event of a dissolution of a marital union with a member of the Montclair family. Her father, a brilliant and cautious man, had built in a failsafe. Gloriana scrolled to the bottom line, her breath catching in her chest. Her trust didn't hold a small legacy stake. It held 35% of Montclair Innovations. Caspian owned 40%. The remaining 25% was held by the board and public shareholders. She wasn't just a scorned wife. She was the second largest shareholder in the company. She wasn't just fighting for her marriage or her dignity. She was fighting for her father's legacy. Caspian and his mistress weren't just destroying her family. They were threatening her birthright. The grief and rage swirling inside her finally coalesced into something new, a singular, diamond-hard purpose. Caspian thought she was a fragile, pregnant homemaker he could placate with apologies and crocodile tears. Naomi Pierce saw her as a domestic annoyance to be dismissed. They had no idea who they were dealing with. They had made the grave error of underestimating the architect, and she was about to show them exactly what she could build and what she could tear down. The knowledge of her inheritance changed everything. It was like discovering a hidden, load-bearing wall in a house you thought was about to collapse. Gloriana's grief, while still present, was now compartmentalized, packed away to be dealt with later. The architect had taken over, and her mind was clear-focused and strategic. She spent another day immersed in the documents, not as a wounded wife, but as a principal shareholder. She highlighted every instance of Naomi's overreach, every questionable expense, every memo that blurred the lines between aggressive business and illegal manipulation. She cross-referenced everything with the company's code of conduct and SEC regulations. She was building a case, brick by damning brick. Her next move had to be precise. Going to Caspian directly was useless. He was compromised, blinded by his affair and his ambition. A direct legal challenge would be messy public and could drag on for years, potentially harming the company, her company. She needed to strike from within, using the corporate structure itself as her weapon. There was only one person who could help her, Alistair Abernathy, the chairman of the board. Alistair was in his late 70s, a titan of old-world finance who had been best friends with her father. He had always been kind to her, treating her with a paternal affection, but she knew that underneath the grandfatherly veneer was a shrewd and ruthless businessman who valued stability and integrity above all else. He had been skeptical of Caspian's more aggressive tactics, and Gloriana recalled from a company dinner had made a coolly dismissive comment about Naomi Pierce's unseemly ambition. He was her best, and perhaps only chance. She called his private line, a number her father had given her years ago for emergencies. "Abernathy," he answered his voice, a low, gravelly rumble. "Alistair, it's Gloriana Montclair, Peter Davenport's daughter." She deliberately used her maiden name. Today she was a Davenport. There was a brief pause. "Gloriana, it's good to hear your voice, my dear, though I suspect this isn't a social call. Is everything all right?" "No, Alistair, it is not," she said, her voice steady and firm. "I need to meet with you urgently, and in the strictest confidence. It concerns the ethical governance and future stability of Montclair Innovations." The formality and gravity of her words clearly had an effect. "I see," he said, his tone shifting from paternal to professional. "My office tomorrow morning at 9. My assistant will clear my schedule." The next morning, Gloriana dressed with the care of someone preparing for battle. She chose a simple but impeccably tailored navy blue maternity dress, flat but expensive leather shoes, and pulled her hair back into a severe, elegant chignon. She wore no jewelry except her father's old watch. She looked not like a victim, but like a woman of substance and authority. Alistair Abernathy's office was a wood-panelled sanctuary of old money and power high above Wall Street. He greeted her at the door, his sharp blue eyes full of concern as he took in her appearance. "Gloriana, you look pale. Please sit. Can I get you some tea?" "Water would be fine, thank you," she said, taking a seat in a leather armchair opposite his massive desk. He sat down, folded his hands, and looked at her expectantly. "Now tell me what's so important that it couldn't wait." Gloriana took a deep breath. "Alistair, I am going to tell you two things. The first is personal, and I tell it to you only to provide context for the second, which is a matter of urgent corporate security. I trust this will not leave this room." He nodded gravely. "You have my word. I have discovered that my husband, Caspian, has been engaged in a long-term affair with his Vice President of Strategic Acquisitions, Naomi Pierce." Alistair's expression didn't change, but a muscle in his jaw tightened. He said nothing, letting her continue. "Ordinarily," Gloriana went on, her voice devoid of emotion, "that would be a private matter to be handled with divorce lawyers. However, their affair is inextricably linked with the company. Caspian has given Ms. Pierce an unprecedented and dangerous level of influence. He has allowed her to approve her own exorbitant and questionable expenses, and more alarmingly, he has signed off on a strategy for the Etheria Dynamics acquisition, Project Nightingale, that involves market manipulation and potential illegalities, all conceived and driven by her." She opened her briefcase and laid a single concise folder on his desk. "This is a summary of my findings, complete with supporting documents. Expense reports, internal memos, the works. I believe Ms. Pierce is not just a liability to my marriage, but a grave threat to the integrity and legal standing of Montclair Innovations." Alistair opened the folder. He spent 10 minutes reading, his eyes scanning the pages with practiced speed. The silence was absolute. When he finally looked up, his face was grim. "This is deeply disturbing," he said. "Caspian has shown poor judgment before, but this is a level of recklessness I find hard to comprehend. Your assessment is correct. Pierce is a cancer in this company." He paused, looking at her with a new respect. "You've done the work of a forensic accountant, Gloriana. I'm an architect, Alistair. I look for structural weaknesses, and our company is compromised. Indeed," he sighed, leaning back, "but our options are limited. Caspian is the CEO and the majority shareholder. He can protect her. A public accusation would tank our stock price. My hands are somewhat tied." This was the moment. Gloriana met his gaze without flinching. "That's the second thing I came to tell you, Alistair. Caspian is not the majority shareholder." She handed him a second folder. This one contained a copy of her father's trust agreement. Alistair's eyebrows shot up. He put on a pair of reading glasses and read the document slowly, then read it again. A low whistle escaped his lips. "Peter, you magnificent, clever bastard," he murmured to himself. He looked at Gloriana as if seeing her for the first time. The grieving wife was gone. In her place sat the second-largest shareholder of a multi-billion-dollar enterprise. 35%. He said, a slow smile spreading across his face. "The trust is activated upon the dissolution of your marriage. Gloriana, my dear, you are a powerhouse. The divorce proceedings will begin this week," she stated calmly. "Which means my power as a shareholder is imminent. I want Naomi Pierce removed from the company immediately, and I want a full independent audit of Project Nightingale before it proceeds any further." Alistair Abernathy leaned forward, his eyes gleaming with the thrill of a fight he now knew he could win. "Caspian will never see this coming. He'll call an emergency board meeting to try and consolidate his position to defend Pierce. He'll expect us to back down. Let him," Gloriana said, a cold fire in her veins. "Let him call his meeting. I'll be there." The old man grinned. "Gloriana Davenport," he said, admiration ringing in his voice. "Welcome to the board." The emergency board meeting was called for Friday afternoon. The summons sent by Caspian was terse, citing the need to address unfounded rumors and ensure strategic alignment on Project Nightingale. Gloriana knew it was a preemptive strike. Caspian, having discovered she was filing for divorce and had likely spoken to Alistair, was trying to circle the wagons to get the board to publicly back him, and by extension, Naomi. He was walking directly into her trap. Gloriana spent the day before the meeting with Robert Gable and his team of corporate litigators rehearsing her presentation. They advised her to remain calm, factual, and to frame everything in terms of fiduciary duty and shareholder value, not personal betrayal. The affair was the context, not the crime. The corporate malfeasance was the crime. She walked into the 30th floor boardroom at precisely 2:00 p.m. The 10 board members, a collection of powerful grey-haired men, and 2 formidable women, were already seated around the enormous granite table. Alistair Abernathy sat at the head, giving her a subtle, encouraging nod as she entered. Caspian was at the opposite end, his face pale and strained. And next to him, in a position of honor that was a brazen display of defiance, sat Naomi Pierce. She was not a board member and had no right to be there, but Caspian had clearly brought her as a show of force. Naomi's eyes locked onto Gloriana's, and for the first time, Gloriana saw a flicker of uncertainty behind the usual arrogance. She had not anticipated this. She had expected Gloriana to be at home, weeping into a pillow. "What is she doing here?" Caspian demanded, his voice tight with fury, as he addressed Alistair. "This is a closed meeting. I invited her," Alistair said calmly, "as a courtesy to the representative of the Davenport Trust, which, as you may have forgotten, controls a significant portion of this company." A murmur went around the table. Caspian looked as though he'd been physically struck. He clearly had no idea about the full extent of her father's trust. He shot Gloriana a look of utter disbelief and betrayal. She met it with a cool, unreadable calm. "Let's begin," Alistair said, his voice cutting through the tension. "Caspian, you called this meeting. The floor is yours." Caspian, visibly thrown off balance, stood up and launched into a rambling defensive speech. He praised Naomi Pierce's vision and unparalleled commitment. He spoke of Project Nightingale as the company's salvation and dismissed the unfounded rumors as malicious distractions stemming from a private, personal matter that he deeply regretted. It was a weak, transparent performance. He was pleading, not leading. When he finished, a tense silence fell over the room. "Thank you, Caspian," Alistair said, his tone icy. "Now we will hear from Mrs. Montclair." Gloriana stood. She did not look at Caspian or Naomi. She addressed the board. "Good afternoon." She began, her voice clear and steady, resonating with a quiet authority that commanded attention. "I am not here today to discuss my husband's infidelity. I am here as a concerned shareholder representing my father, Peter Davenport's 35% stake in this company. I am here to discuss a cancer that has metastasized within our executive leadership, a cancer that threatens the ethical and financial foundation of Montclair Innovations." For the next 20 minutes, she laid out her case with chilling precision. She never raised her voice. She presented the facts, displaying documents on the room's main screen, the inflated expense reports, the unapproved trips, the memos outlining Naomi's manipulative strategies for the Etheria takeover. "Ms. Pierce," Gloriana said, turning to look directly at her for the first time, "has systematically abused her position of trust. She has enriched herself at the company's expense and has exposed this board and every shareholder to significant legal and financial risk through her reckless and unethical tactics on Project Nightingale." She then delivered the killing blow. "Furthermore, my legal team has uncovered evidence that Ms. Pierce was actively negotiating with a private equity firm using confidential data from Project Nightingale as leverage, presumably to secure a position for herself post-acquisition, effectively betraying the very company she claims to serve. Brenda's final file had contained emails between Naomi and a rival firm, the ultimate proof of her treachery. The boardroom erupted. Caspian stared at Naomi, his face a canvas of dawning horror and disbelief. "Naomi, is this true?" Naomi Pierce, for the first time, looked panicked, her composure shattered. "This is absurd. It's a fabrication by a jealous wife," she stammered, but her voice lacked conviction. The evidence on the screen was undeniable. Alistair Abernathy stood up, his presence filling the room. "I think we have heard enough. I am calling for a vote. A vote on the immediate termination, with cause of Ms. Naomi Pierce for gross misconduct and breach of fiduciary duty. And a second vote on placing CEO Caspian Montclair on a mandatory leave of absence, pending a full independent investigation into his oversight of Project Nightingale." "You can't do this," Caspian bellowed, his face turning a blotchy red. "I own 40%. I am this company." "40% is not a majority, Caspian," Alistair said grimly. "And I believe you'll find the rest of the board is in agreement with me." One by one they voted. Aye. 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 It was unanimous. Naomi Pierce grabbed her briefcase, her face pale with fury and humiliation, and stormed out of the room without another word. Caspian sank into his chair, a broken man. He stared across the table at Gloriana, the woman he had betrayed. He hadn't just lost his mistress. He had lost his company, his power, his wife, and his dignity, all in the space of half an hour. He had underestimated her completely, and she, with the cool, methodical precision of an architect, had brought his entire corrupt structure crashing down around him. Gloriana simply gathered her papers, gave a slight nod to Alistair, and walked out, leaving the wreckage behind. She didn't feel triumph, only a quiet, somber sense of justice. The demolition was complete. Now she could begin to build again. The weeks that followed the boardroom coup were a maelstrom of legal maneuvers, a storm of paper and procedure designed to formally dismantle a life. The divorce was on the surface, swift and brutal. Caspian, a king deposed from his own kingdom, had no fight left in him. His power stripped away in that granite-walled boardroom had been the scaffolding of his identity. Without it, he collapsed. His legal team made a few desperate, feeble attempts to argue for a settlement that would keep Gloriana's shares under his managerial control, a last-ditch effort to retain some semblance of his former empire. In his office, Robert Gable simply slid the trust documents across the table and stared at them until they retreated. The prenuptial agreement and the inviolable terms of her father's trust were not just ironclad. They were a fortress wall against which Caspian's diminished forces broke. The investigation into Project Nightingale, conducted by an impartial third party, laid bare the rot that had set in. It was a sordid tale of Naomi's ambition and Caspian's willing blindness. The Etheria takeover was unceremoniously scrapped, a move that saved the company from a legal quagmire and financial ruin. Following the board's final unanimous vote, Caspian's leave of absence became a permanent severance from his role as CEO. He was left with his 40% share, a vast fortune, but now just a number on a page. He was a spectator to the empire he once commanded. Gloriana saw him one last time in the sterile conference room of Robert Gable's firm to sign the final divorce decree. The air was thick with the scent of old leather and the unspoken history of 1,000 broken promises. Caspian looked hollowed out, a ghost haunting the expensive suit that now seemed a size too big for his frame. The arrogant energy that had once filled every room was gone, replaced by a grey, weary exhaustion. He didn't look at the lawyers or the stacks of paper. He only looked at her. His eyes filled with a desperate, belated clarity. "Gloriana," he began, his voice raspy, a pale imitation of its former confident timbre. "I know sorry is meaningless now, but I am. I destroyed everything. The best thing in my life." Gloriana looked at the man she had once loved, with every fibre of her being. There was no hatred left, no searing rage. All that had been burned away, leaving only a quiet, sad detachment. He was a relic from a life that no longer belonged to her. She picked up the pen, its weight cool and solid in her hand. "Yes, you did, Caspian," she said, her voice calm, and even as she signed her name with a firm, steady flourish. "But you only destroyed what we built together. What my father built, what I will build. That's just beginning." 2 months later, in the pristine quiet of a hospital room overlooking the East River, Gloriana held her son for the first time. She named him Peter. As he curled his tiny, perfect hand around her finger, a profound and final shift occurred within her. The last vestiges of her old life fell away. The grief, the betrayal, the fight, it all receded, replaced by the fierce, overwhelming gravity of a new purpose. This tiny, warm, breathing life in her arms was her true foundation. He was the future. In the quiet nights that followed, she would sit in the nursery. She had designed a room of soft greys, warm woods, and a ceiling painted with a map of the stars, and simply hold him. She saw her father's thoughtful eyes, in his, her own determination, in the set of his tiny jaw. She was no longer just a woman who had been wronged. She was a mother, a guardian of a legacy. She returned to the Park Avenue penthouse, not as a ghost in a marital mausoleum, but as its sole owner. She had the entire apartment repainted, exorcising the memories. The oxblood Eames chair, the one that had been the catalyst for her world's implosion, she had removed. It wasn't destroyed, but donated to a university archive of classic design. It was a part of history now, not her life. 4 more months passed. The world turned, and Gloriana Davenport found her footing on the new ground she had claimed. Alistair Abernathy, serving as interim CEO, had leaned on her wisdom and calm resolve. She took her seat on the board of Montclair Innovations, not as a placeholder, but as an active, formidable presence. She had no desire to run the tech empire day to day, but she used her power to steer its moral compass. Her first act was to establish the Davenport Foundation, a philanthropic arm of the company dedicated to sustainable urban architecture and community development, which brought her here to a dusty construction site in Brooklyn on a crisp autumn afternoon. The sun was setting over the Manhattan skyline, a distant, glittering kingdom that no longer held any power over her. Here, surrounded by the scent of upturned earth and the clang of steel, she felt truly at home. Her son Peter, now 6 months old, was asleep in a carrier strapped to her chest. His small, warm body, a constant, comforting reminder of what mattered. This was her first project, a state-of-the-art, environmentally friendly community center. It was her design, born from her grief, and rebuilt into a vision of hope. She ran a hand over a blueprint, the clean, precise lines representing not just walls and windows, but a future. She was creating a space with integrity, with light, with a foundation that was honest and strong, everything her marriage had lacked. Her phone buzzed, pulling her from her reverie. It was a text from Alistair. "New CEO candidate is excellent. Your recommendation was spot on. The company is stable. How is my favorite shareholder?" A genuine smile touched Gloriana's lips as she typed her reply one-handed, while subconsciously rocking her sleeping son. covered in dust and happier than I've been in years." She slipped the phone back into her pocket and looked out at the steel skeleton of the building rising against the purple and orange sky. It was a promise taking shape. She had walked into her husband's office that day as a wife content in a life she thought was perfect, and had her world detonated. But in the rubble she had found something far more valuable than the gilded cage she had lost. She had found herself. She had unearthed a strength she never knew she possessed, and claimed a legacy that was her birthright. The demolition was long over. The architect was back at work, building a world of her own design on a foundation that no one could ever shatter again. That day in the office was the end of a fairy tale, but it was the beginning of a real-life epic of strength and resilience. Gloriana's story isn't just about betrayal, it's about the incredible power that can be found in the wreckage of our lives. It's a reminder that sometimes the most devastating moments are the ones that force us to discover who we truly are and the legacy we're meant to build. She thought she was designing a home, but she was really meant to design an empire. If her journey from heartbreak to head of the table moved, you please show your support. Hit that like button to let us know you appreciate stories of empowerment. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder of their own strength. And most importantly, subscribe to the channel and ring the bell so you won't miss our next story of real-life drama and ultimate triumph. Thank you for listening.